Everyone, thanks for listening to the Western Hunting Hub podcast. In this episode, we're going to start a cooking special where we're just going to chat about some of the things that I like to do with my wild game and some fish and whatnot. So just label it part one with anticipation that we'll have a part 2, 3, 4, who knows, because I'm sure Drea will want to chime in on this as well. But I've had some fun messing around with some different things in the kitchen, and this is the time of year to really dive into that when it's winter, it's negative whatever outside, and there's some time to play around with some recipes and not anything to do too terrible much except maybe do some ice fishing and maybe a little shed hunting, depending on where you are. So that's where I'm at. I'm not able to do too terrible much, even the cooking, just with my living situation. You all know that I moved to South Dakota and looking for a house, trying to find a place to live, place to record podcasts, and even recorded a few sitting in my truck. And so looked at a house today. Maybe it's got a nice little spot and make a good studio out of it to record, and also be a good hunting gear room and whatever else. So trying to find that. It's just not the easiest thing. As many of you know, the housing market's pretty rough all over the place, and there's not a whole lot of options. So I'm making do in an apartment right now, which is not for me whatsoever, but I will deal. So really want to thank all of you listeners for listening as much as you do, and we've been getting some questions in, so please, if you got some questions, and they don't expect me to have the answers, but I want to have some questions prompted to me that I can go research and find out some answers for you. So please send us your questions, and we'll have a Q&A episode here in the future. Next episode we're going to do with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or one of the next Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We've got two different ones. We need an update on Colorado to see what's going on in that state as far as hunting. I may just be back this year to do a little hunting. We'll see kind of what life brings. So that may need to just happen. Also, Drea's got an episode coming up with a CPW representative about something. Sorry, Drea, I don't know what it's about. And then we'll probably do another cooking portion sometime this winter. And then I've got an interview just here this week with OnX. They have some new things that they're releasing that I'm kind of excited to hear about. And we'll hear kind of what they got in the works. So let's get rolling with this episode. Some of the things that you should try and do in the kitchen is be creative and figure out what you can do with your wild game to maybe bring those folks in a little closer that don't really eat wild game too terrible much, or a fun thing to do with friends. And my wife does not eat wild game. She'll eat a little bit of ground meat here and there, maybe a backstrap, but that's about it. That's just, she didn't grow up with it. It wasn't her thing. And so I'm challenging myself to try and find some of those recipes that just are amazing, are the absolute best recipes out there, so that even she really wants to eat it. So try and messing around with some of these. You've got a lot of it. If you were successful, you've got a lot of meat. Otherwise, it's normally you go to the store, buy a pound or two here and there, so you don't have too terrible much, and you don't probably have, when you're talking about beef anyway, at that time when you buy in the store, you probably have a steak and maybe some burger. But when you butcher your whole animal, you've got a variety of cuts that is pretty fun to mess around with. So first on my list, actually before I get to that, a little plug for my work at South Dakota Game Fish and Parks. If you Google or on YouTube the outdoor campus Rapid City, you can find some videos that I put together there. There's a couple of recipes that we've been doing there, so go check those out. Mine are a touch different than that I'm going to talk about, but I'll overlap a couple. So the first one on my list is some fish cakes, and this is something I messed around with last fall, And I did it again here for like a little Valentine's meal thing, and I did it with the wrong fish species. This is not meant to be done with trout. I am not crazy about trout. Everybody I fed them to, they loved them, even though they were made with trout. Something about trout, I don't like fishing for them necessarily unless it's on a fly, and I don't like eating them. So sorry if you're one of the millions that do, because that's not me. I'd rather eat a walleye and a perch and a crappie or whatever. So that is the best fish, I think, to make these fish cakes out of. And it was a very simple recipe. I didn't follow anything really all that to the T. But what you do is just take any kind of fish, and I think a really good fish to do this with, or person to feed this to, is like a little kid, and a fish that is bony. So if you puree all the meat, then it grinds up all those little bones, and you have to worry about your kid choking on a bone. So that's what I did this first time around, and my kid ate like 3 of these things. He loved them. So what you do is take, I don't know, pound and a half of some fish. I'd suggest even some bass of some sort, walleye, northern. You can do it with quite a few different species of fish, but with that fish species, grind it up almost to a puree in a food processor. Then add in some salt and pepper, of course. I tried a little Old Bay on this last recipe, but what I really liked was something a little bit more herby. I tried, I know that may not be a word, but I use it anyway. I used some of Meat Eater seasoning, the white one, the pecan one of some sort. I don't even know what it's called, but that in there was probably the best. So mess around with just your different seasonings in there. You can do some different things. A spoonful of some sour cream, spoonful of mayo, and then you got to just start adding breadcrumbs to get it to a point where you can handle it, because otherwise it's really sticky, and you can't form a ball out of it. So add breadcrumbs and just keep pureeing it until it gets to be something you can handle. Make a little ball about the size of a $50, and then squish them flat. You don't want them to be too terrible thick, because then they won't puff up in the middle and they'll just be a dense fish cake. A nice, light, fluffy fish cake is what you really want. And I think once you add a lot of that breadcrumbs, it gets less fluffy. So you got to find that balance in there. You don't want to add too terrible many. So anyway, you got your little ball. You squished it flat. And then you're going to dunk that in some panko just to bread it. So you've got breadcrumbs on the inside and you got panko on the outside. Get your oil up to about 350 or so, maybe a little higher. It needs to be hot. 350 to 380, I think, somewhere in there. It needs to be good and hot, because if you set it in there too soon, it's going to start soaking up the oil and not add any great flavor to it. So get that nice and hot. Drop your patties in there. Flip them once they're golden brown, and you can deep fat fry them in some thick or a lot of deep oil, or you can just do like a small little bit. But the handy thing is when you got a decent amount of it and they start to float up, that's when you know they've kind of popped in the middle and they're good to go. So that with a little tartar sauce is really good. And I've done a lot of fried fish before, but never in that way. And I'm going to be adding that into the repertoire of eating fish. So try that. Yesterday was Valentine's Day. My wife and I had some steak and potatoes, and what else do we have? I don't remember. But it was good. Oh, some little candied carrots, because we had some extra carrots. That was really good. We did a recipe also for my work, and we had some Brussels sprouts, bacon, and butter as a side on there. But anyway, down to the backstrap that we had. We had the steak. I got her a New York strip because that's what she likes. I took some of my elk backstrap, and we did it just a little differently, and it was one of the best backstraps I've had. And I think I've said that a dozen times in my life, so I don't know which time was completely accurate. But we're in an apartment, and it's negative 12 degrees outside right now, so we're not grilling, and I didn't have it. I don't really have my real grill here anyway, so it wasn't going to turn out right. So we've got a cast iron skillet, and a little plug for cast iron skillets. Use those as much as possible. I made some chicken noodle soup the other day and actually made it in the cast iron. You could see the different color of the broth versus what I did in just like a Teflon pan, and it tasted 10 times better. You could just tell. So anyway, back to my steak. I've got about inch to inch and a quarter hunks of backstrap that I cut. And I always just like to throw a little olive oil and some kosher salt, and then the Weber steak seasoning. That's kind of been our favorite. So I'll put that on there. And then my wife mixed up some butter and parsley and some garlic. Kind of mix that all up. I put that in the bottom of the pan and let that kind of melt through my steaks in there, and constantly spoon fed some of that butter over top of the steak. And I only flipped that thing once, got it nice and charged on one side, charred on the other side. And so it was only had about 3/8 of an inch, like brown on the outside on each side. And it was pink all the way through. Nice and pink, or red. So it was definitely a rare steak. And in my opinion, rare to medium rare is the only way to eat some wild game, for sure, as long as it's not bear. But anyway, having that rare to it, and that butter and the garlic and all of that cooked just a little differently than you would have on a grill was really, really good. So try that. Next recipe that I have been messing around with a lot are my ribs. And I try to take ribs out of the field whenever I can. I'm pretty loaded up on ribs right now, and I've never really done that before the last 2 years, and I was missing out. The ribs are some amazing cuts. They're just kind of a pain to deal with, but you can manage. They're pretty manageable once you figure it out. The only tricky thing is cutting the bone. I would like to have, like, if you had a loppers, just to cut through the bone and get the rib chunks in, say, about a 8-inch by 6-inch little squares. I don't clean off too terrible much of that flank and the extra meat, those layers that are sitting on top. I just try and get rid of as much of the fat or tallow that's there, because that does not add to the flavor. It's horrible. So cut that off as much as you can. The rest of it's slow cooked, so it's going to liquefy to the top, and you'll be good. So this is the way that's been working for me, and it's not perfected yet. I know there's another method I could do here with either my smoker or maybe even in the oven. I'm not sure. But I took a crock pot and filled it almost all the way up, load it with ribs so that they're completely submerged, and you put that on low for 8 hours, 6 hours, 6 to 8 hours. That's what it is. No less than 6. What happens is you start to get that fat coming up, and all the other stuff, the silver skin and all that's going to liquefy. It's going to float to the top there. You can't tell it's there because it's liquefied, but once it cools and hardens, you'll know it's there. And sometimes that cools and hardens on the roof of your mouth, it's not very appetizing. So you can either, over time, scoop that out with a cup and dump it out, and replace it with some new stock. Or when it is all done, hold that meat down in there, dump it out, because otherwise, if you pick those ribs up through that fat layer, it will literally grab back onto those ribs, and it'll be there through the cooking process. So I'm trying to think that if I do those on the smoker, they'll still be as fall off the bone and tender, with maybe getting rid of some of that tallow flavors. Yeah, so that would be if you can manage the tallow, it'll be some of the best ribs you have. I'm not kidding. So we've got our ribs cooked, slow cooked, whatever fashion you want to try doing it. Then take some dry rub, your barbecue dry rub, whatever it is. Again, my favorite's the Meat Eater barbecue rub that they have, or it's in their cookbook. You can try that. And then I throw it on the grill just enough to sear it. And then once I flip it over, that's when I throw barbecue sauce on the top of that so that caramelizes, so that both sides are seared. Pull that off, put it on a plate, you're good to go. The barbecue sauce that I choose and will always choose is Old West barbecue sauce. It's out of South Dakota. It's a sweeter barbecue sauce. I do not do spice. I'm a giant wimp with that, and I don't care. I like my sweet barbecue sauces, and this stuff is better than Sweet Baby Ray's and anything else that I've had. I really, really like it. So there's some ribs. Try that. My next recipe is some Sous-Vide Duck. I haven't shot a mallard in some time. So I really haven't duck on it in a while. Maybe being back in South Dakota is something that I can get back into. But this was a really simple recipe, and if you haven't done any sous vide, it's kind of a handy way to not miss that doneness window. So with that, I took a duck breast, put it in a food saver bag, shrink wrapped or whatever you call that. So there's it's just in the bag with some ghee butter, Ghee, a little bit of that, some salt and pepper on it, and then throw in a hunk of, where's my recipe? I'm looking at my stuff here, trying to share that. A hunk of thyme and ghee butter. Yeah, that's all it was. Hunk of ghee butter and thyme, and then seal that little bag up. Try and get as much air out of that as possible so it doesn't float. And then what you can do is put that at 130 degrees for 1 to 4 hours, somewhere in there. Cook that, pull it out of the bag, sear it on both sides. And you can salt and pepper again, sear it on both sides on a grill. And that's an amazing steak. Even though it's a duck breast, which I've never really thought much about doing any kind of steak with, but it was really good. Oh, here's my rest of my sous vide duck. Oh, 128. Jeez, I was way off. I did a sous vide steak. There's my correction. Sous vide duck is we take that steak, we thaw it, pat it dry, salt and pepper in a bag, add some ghee butter, thyme, and garlic. Don't forget that. 128 degrees, 30 minutes per half inch, and then grill it to finish it off. It's really, really good. Next on my list is not wild game whatsoever, but just a tasty little addition that you should have while you're grilling and entertaining some people. It's just some French bread. Go to the store, get a good loaf of French bread on a plate. Get some garlic, a couple tablespoons of oregano, a quarter cup of Parmesan cheese, quarter cup of balsamic vinegar, and a little black pepper, and then a half cup of olive oil. Mix that all up, and then just rip off hunks of bread and dip that in there, and it's a really, really good little appetizer while you're cooking and chatting and doing what else in the kitchen. Next thing I've done recently, the last year, was mess around with a little bear fat. Buddy gave me a hunk of bear fat from a while ago. I hear that does go bad in the freezer after a while. I don't know if mine did or not, but I think I rendered it a little wrong or a little too long. I'm not sure. So all I did was boil that. I would do a real quick boil on that if I were to do that again. So I do want to get some more bear fat. So any of my buddies listening, make sure you save me a little bear fat. Unless I'm coming back to Colorado and I can actually, I might throw in the $100 bear tag. Who knows? So make sure you save me a little bear fat. That's been a really kind of a fun thing to do, and I can't wait to get my house again where I can mess around with that some more. But just taking, instead of using olive oil or vegetable oil and whatever you're cooking, using some sort of animal fat. I want to do that even with just some like pork fat of some sort. Have some of that rendered down, ready to go, and then it just changes the flavor of your food quite a bit. So another great way to do that similar steak recipe is throw in some animal fat instead of some plant-based oils and things like that. So really good way to get some quality flavor. Another recipe I did at work was a stuffed backstrap. Using butcher's twine is one of those things that you just need to have because there are a lot of recipes that pop up. I'm not going to tell you much about that one. Go check that one out. It's on my work's YouTube page, Game Fish and Parks Outdoor Campus, Rapid City. The next one I am pretty partial to. This has been a really good opportunity to use a crappy cut of meat. The shanks are always a pain, and I got a lot of buddies that will just kind of shave that off and throw it in the grind pile, but it just taints your grind pile, and you'll never get all that stuff out of there. The easiest way, honestly, is just to cut it off at the joint, so you got one whole shank and freeze it that way. Then that entire thing just goes straight into a crock pot for a long period of time, or not a long period, but 4 hours, 6 hours, somewhere in there, and that meat just comes right off. You take a fork and you flake it. Now you got shredded meat, which is the same thing that you can use in some tacos or some pulled pork, whatever. Doesn't matter. You've got shredded meat. You can use it for anything you would use burger for, and you've used a good hunk of that meat in an easy way, and it's not all ending up in burger. Similar method is some mountain lion sandwiches. I did a video on that. That's on that same YouTube channel, so check that out. And all I did there was take my wife's pulled pork recipe, where she takes a pork loin, and in this case I took a mountain lion hunk. I don't even know what cut it was, but took that and put it in a crock pot and took 20 ounces of Dr. Pepper, filled that up so it fills the crock pot to about halfway or so, and then turn that on low for 6-ish hours or so. That then is nice and tender, and you can shred it. Pull it out of the Dr. Pepper. You don't want all that moisture, but pull it out of there, shred it, add some Old West barbecue sauce, and that is a great sandwich. I think I even threw a little barbecue rub on top of it before I slow cooked it, so it's cooking through a little bit more seasoning. But that's a really great way to have some pulled pork sandwiches, kind of that typical graduation meal that every kid has in the Midwest at their high school graduation is a pulled pork sandwich. And you could do it with mountain lion. So there's a couple little themed meals that you can try, totally different, from bear fat to bony fish to ribs and shank and mountain lion, some of those odd cuts. But I didn't even think it was that odd when I was making this meal. Oh, and duck. But I would rant and rave and see these are some of my go-to, like I want to impress somebody with a good meal. These are the ones I'm going to go to and try. So there's a few for you. If you got a few you want to share and that I can give you credit for, send in your recipes and we'll share them just to better each other and help each other get some better recipes in the kitchen and help our wives eat some more wild game if they don't. So thanks for listening. Make sure you send in any questions, comments you got. Love to hear them. And we look forward to those next episodes with Onyx and CPW. So, again, thanks for listening. We'll chat with you later.
But it ain't my ground. This is God's country.